Tutaj wszystko opiera
It all
się
comes down to
na
trust and
zaufaniu
reputation.
I reputacji. Są to bardzo często
These are often small-sized
gabarytowo małe
loads, but very
ładunki,
expensive.
natomiast bardzo drogie.
They
Mogą
can
to
also
być
include
również towary
oversized
typu
items like
śmigła,
helicopter blades for military aircraft.
Teraz ja zadam tobie pytanie.
Now let me ask you a
Powiedz,
question.
czy wiesz albo jesteś w stanie
Do you
oszacować
know or are you
plus minus,
able to
ile
estimate
kosztuje
approximately how
szkolenie,
much it costs to train a specialist in our
specjalisty
GROM special
w
unit?
naszej jednostce specjalnej GROM? Przestrzeliłeś?
You missed,
Did I miss the mark?
Ale w drugą
but in the
stronę.
other direction.
Nie mogłem doczekać się tego odcinka, bo temat dzisiaj...
I couldn't wait for this episode because today's topic is highly specialized. We'll definitely be covering a lot of valuable knowledge. In this episode of our podcast, we'll be talking about the transport of military goods, a very current issue, especially in light of the ongoing actions of our neighboring countries and what's happening around the world. Our guide through this topic will be Magda, a business development manager specializing in military logistics. Hi, Magda.
Hi, Conrad. Hello, everyone.
Często na pewno pojawiasz się na targach militarnych.
Magda, you're often seen at military fairs, and perhaps it's a bit stereotypical, but I get the impression that this is still mostly a male-dominated field. How do you find your place at such events as a woman, especially when you're involved in military transport?
Osoba, która oferuje transport militariów.
Myślę, że bardzo dobrze dobrałeś słowo, że stereotypowo.
I think you've chosen the right word, stereotypically, because we are increasingly seeing women in this sector. Just like in the logistics sector, where a significant portion of positions are held by women.
A jak się czujesz na takich...
How do you feel at these fairs?
Jak one wyglądają?
What exactly happens there?
I feel very good. These are trade fairs, and I can say with full confidence. Of course, depending on the type of fair you choose, because they can be smaller regional fairs in Poland or international ones on a global scale. Trade fairs are organized according to the scale. Some of the biggest ones can be found in London. These are the DSEI fairs, which I attended this year, and which made a huge impression on me, which we can discuss in a moment.
No i jak to wygląda na miejscu tam?
What do they look like? And how does it look on the ground? Are there tanks, protective gear on display, soldiers marching? What's it like behind the scenes?
Powiem tak, jest wszystko. Jest wszystko.
I'd say it's everything. It's everything. Starting with government and military delegations. Men in full military uniform with protection.
Z ochroną, przepraszam.
Then there are various companies, from global giants to smaller startups, and even firms that until now were not necessarily involved in the military sector, but decided to enter and offer products tailored to the needs of the military sector due to its rapid growth.
Wiesz, ja targi kojarzę z tym, że...
You know, I associate fairs with a lot of civilians. There's a lot of entertainment to engage people, to get them interested in your product or service. A lot of giveaways, too. Are there even military-themed gadgets at these fairs? I'm curious, what kind of things can you get there?
Of course, there are gadgets at every fair. Typically, I would say, pens, notepads, notebooks, magnets, bags, calendars, everything.
So there aren't any pens that have a James Bond-style double function like spy gadgets.
Lasers? No.
Well, since we're talking about dual-use items, I've come across the understanding that military transport involves not only direct transportation of weapons, but also components and products or semi-products that have both civilian and military uses. Could you elaborate on this topic a bit? I think it's important to clarify what dual-use goods are because this will likely be very relevant in our conversation going forward.
Exactly. Military transport generally includes all goods intended for the defense and armament sectors, as well as so-called dual-use goods. These are goods that have both civilian and military applications. Examples could include various telecommunications technologies, navigation systems, robots, drones, sonars, scanners, and even machine tools or lathes.
Żeby przewieźć tokarkę,
So,
muszę
if I want to
wykonać
transport a
zadania
lathe,
specjalne. To już jest
would I need any
coś,
special
co
permits?
wymaga
Is this kind of transport
jakiejś
subject to restrictions?
Not necessarily. It all depends on where the goods are being shipped from or where they are stored.
Czyli jeżeli jestem producentem
If I'm a
nawigacji,
manufacturer of GPS-based navigation systems,
y, muszę to gdzieś zgłosić, jeżeli będę
would I need to report this anywhere if I wanted to export it, say, to Belarus?
eksportować na Białoruś?
Such permits, if the goods fall under dual use, are checked in appropriate registers under EU, Polish, or American classifications. If a product falls under that list, the appropriate permits must be obtained. However, this is the responsibility of the manufacturer of the goods.
Gdybyśmy byli
Okay, so if we were employees of a
pracownikami,
transport and logistics company and received an order to transport such a load,
takiego ładunku,
whose
to
responsibility is it to
po
classify
stronie
whether
jest,
it's dual use?
jakby klasyfikacja.
Who
Czy jest
determines the
faktycznie
possibility of
ładunku z
executing this order to a specific
e,
country?
jakie są
Is it our
możliwości realizacji
responsibility to
tego
classify it as dual
danego
use?
kraju? To jest po naszej stronie wtedy tego.
Definitely, primarily on the manufacturer's side, who must know whether they are producing, exporting, shipping, or selling their goods in compliance with regulations. The second side is, of course, the carrier, who must also check the classification of the goods, the destination country, all export procedures, and only then possibly apply for the appropriate permits if the transport requires them. The necessity, or rather the basis for transporting such goods, is the WSK certificate, that is, the internal control system.
To WSK to jest certyfikat, który
Is the WSK certificate valid only in Poland, or is it recognized in the European Union as well? How should we look at this?
Yes, it is a Polish certificate issued in Poland, but it is recognized throughout the European Union.
powiedziałaś o transporcie, o procedurach.
You've talked about the procedures for transporting dual-use goods, and already things seem quite complicated.
Skomplikowanie. A co dopiero przewóz militariów. Dobrze myślę?
Exactly. Here we're entering a more complicated documentation process, meeting various security requirements and ensuring compliance not only within a given country, but also across the European Union. It all depends on how the goods are classified.
A możemy o jakimś
Could we talk about a specific example?
przykładu?
How would such a transport be executed in practice? For instance, Poland to France. Let's say we want to transport some dual-use goods and military supplies. How would this process differ?
I'll repeat once again. It might be the case that the goods will be transported under a NATO Customs Document 302, meaning that such transport will be somewhat simplified from a customs perspective because it's a document allowing the transport of those goods without paying any customs duties.
That sounds quite complex. Do you think many companies in Poland have such certification and the capability to transport military goods?
I think, at this point, not much. However, looking at the sector's growth, we can expect an increase in interest because the sector is becoming increasingly attractive and thus more competitive. Visline, of course, has the WSK certificate and considerable experience in transporting both military and dual-use transports.
Możesz zdradzić, co najczęściej się przewozi?
Can you share what's most commonly transported?
I think there won't be much surprise here, because we most often transport various components, parts. Not always are these ready-made products. It rarely happens, but these are certainly some components that will later form a whole.
No właśnie, Polska jest takim,
Indeed, Poland seems to be a center in Europe for the production of semi-products and components in the automotive industry.
Jakichś elementów składowych w branży motoryzacyjnej.
I'm wondering if the current crisis in the automotive sector is being used as an opportunity to shift focus towards producing defense components.
Teraz do tego, by zmienić
What do you think about it?
swoje
Do you
podejście
feel that there are
po prostu
actually changes happening in this area?
na produkcję właśnie komponentów zbrojeniowych? Odczuwasz w ogóle takie tendencje?
Oczywiście, że odczuwam. I
Of
tutaj
course,
nawet
I do
abstrahując
feel it.
od branży
And
automotive,
here, even aside from the automotive industry, there are many different companies from various industries that have noticed their growth potential precisely in this sector.
Właśnie w tym sektorze.
An example could be companies that until now produced various types of tents used for commercial purposes, and now they can produce those tents strictly for military use.
W różnych komercyjnych celach, a dziś
Cywilnie.
mogą produkować takie namioty stricte już pod wykorzystanie dla wojska.
A namiot jest dual use, czy nie?
Would a tent be considered dual use or not?
Zależy
I don't
pewnie
think
jaki.
so.
Zależy
It probably
jaki,
depends on the
dokładnie.
type.
Kolejnym przykładem
Exactly.
mogą być firmy z
Another
branży
example could be
wielkie,
companies from the
które
FMCG
powiedzmy,
sector,
przewożą
which until now,
sprzęt
let's say,
wojskowy,
transported
broń,
frozen or chilled goods. And today, I know a company that also transports food for the military. That means food produced specifically for the military, in small pouches and cans.
Jedzenie specjalnie produkowane dla wojska.
To są
Are these
polskie
Polish manufacturers and Polish
czy
buyers?
eksportujemy?
Do we export these products?
Dlaczego
We
to
export.
wszystko z tym-
Why is it that we struggle so much with domestic production for our own needs?
Polska jest dobrym
I've heard more than
producentem,
once that
ale
Poland
nasi
is a
nie
good
kupują.
producer, but we don't buy our own
Myślę, że
products.
głównym problemem jest cena.
I think the main problem
Jak
is
wiemy,
price.
Polska,
As we know,
już,
Poland has already surpassed a certain development threshold and is no longer the cheapest country when it comes to work organization structure or wage costs.
Strukturę organizacji w pracy czy koszty płacowe.
Therefore, for many
W
Polish
związku
companies,
z tym,
price still works
dla wielu
wonders.
jeszcze polskich firm, w dalszym
In short,
ciągu
price
cena
plays the
czyni
most
cuda.
important or
Krótko
sometimes the
mówiąc,
only
cena
determining
odgrywa
factor for whether a company
najważniejszy
buys
albo
certain
czasem
orders from a
jedyny
given firm.
wyznacznik tego, czy dana firma alokuje pewne zlecenia danej firmie. Konrad, teraz
Conrad,
zadam tobie
now
pytanie.
I'll ask you a
Powiedz,
question.
czy
Do you
wiesz,
know
albo
or are
jesteś
you
w
able to
stanie
estimate
oszacować
approximately
plus,
how much
ile
it
kosztuje
costs to train a
wyszkolenie
specialist in our GROM special unit?
specjalisty, w naszej jednostce specjalnej GROM?
No, zawsze prościej zadawać pytania.
It's always easier to ask
Mnie to
questions.
czasem przekonuje.
I'm just
To,
realizing that now.
Nie wiem, strzelam.
You know what? I'm guessing around 100,000 euro.
You
Co
missed.
strzeliłeś?
Did I overshoot?
But in
Ale
the
w
other
drugą
direction,
stronę.
Aha,
between 1 and
4,5
1.2 million euros.
to faktycznie sporo. No i
I see. That's quite a
jakie
bit.
wnioski z tego?
So, what conclusions can we
Wnioski z tego
draw from this?
takie, że,
The conclusion from this is that
Polska
Poland
buduje
allocates
dużo
significant
pieniędzy w
resources for
szkolenie,
training,
w jakość,
quality, and employees,
w pracowników, natomiast niekoniecznie
but not necessarily for
w
equipment or
wyposażenie
products,
czy
which we
produkty,
ourselves
które
produce.
zresztą sami tutaj produkujemy. Dlatego też większość
Therefore,
tych
most of these
bardzo
very
dobrych
high quality
polskiej
Polish
jakości
products are
jest
exported.
eksportowane.
Ale mamy przecież teraz...
But we do have the equipment
Tak,
operation
teraz
project
tutaj się
now, right?
O ile czegoś nie pomieszałem.
There must be tender rules that set the
Mamy
main
przecież
criteria.
procedury przetargowe.
Is
To
price
jest
still the
ciągle
primary
ewoluowała
condition?
ciągle ta cena?
Na ten moment tak.
At this
Ciągle
point,
cena,
yes,
natomiast
still
widać
price.
dużą różnicę
However,
w
we can see a
sprzedażach,
significant difference in tenders
której
organized
mamy za
abroad
granicą,
with our
naszym
neighbors or in Western Europe,
czy na zachodzie Europy, gdzie cena jest
where price
jednym
is
z
just one of
wielu
many factors
czynników
affecting the
wpływających
outcome
na
of the tender.
rezultat przetargu.
It may
Może
only
stanowić na
constitute,
przykład
for
tylko
example, 15% of the total criterion. Other criteria could be, for example, depending on the goods, but it could be convenience, quality, delivery speed, that is, lead time, and so on.
Powiedz, czy
Tell me, does the transport of military materials and dual-use goods differ operationally from standard transportation?
czy on jakoś różni
I'm not
się
just talking about
operacyjnie
documentation or certifications, but does the actual transport process differ from moving other types of goods?
od przewozu innych produktów?
The process itself, I think, doesn't differ much because every transport should be approached with the highest degree of attention, precision, and ensuring the safety of the transport, no matter what goods it is. However, the difference is significant in documentation, in analyzing a given request for quotation. Because right from the start, before we even provide a price, we have to carefully analyze what kind of goods it is, its classification, where it is to be transported, whether any sanctions apply, what the export regulations are. All of this adds up to a fairly complicated, lengthy, and bureaucratic process.
Can you share what was actually transported? What kind of goods were involved?
I can say very generally. Of course, various components for aviation, various systems. These are often small-sized loads but very expensive. They could also be oversized items like helicopter blades for military aircraft. They could be drones, which are also very expensive.
Is such transport secured in any way? Is there an additional escort?
It depends. Sometimes, of course, it happens that an escort is required, but in most cases, it's more about precisely planning the transport route so that the forwarder has control over how the vehicle should travel, which way exactly, so that the driver is also informed about which parking lots they can stop at. These parking lots must be carefully selected to ensure the highest level of safety for the load.
I'm really curious about how these discussions with clients go. Are they civilians or are they military personnel? Can you share even a little glimpse into that?
There are both civilians and military personnel. Of course, we can meet military personnel at the trade fairs already mentioned. When it comes to conversations, they are definitely very specific. These people know how the transport should be carried out, what they expect from a given company to even begin cooperation. I've encountered many cases where the client requires the subcontractor to have a WSK certificate from the very beginning. Without this, cooperation cannot begin.
Since we're on the topic of certification, how difficult is it to obtain these certifications? Is it a significant challenge for a transport company to change its business profile to be able to transport military goods?
I think obtaining each of the important certificates is not the easiest thing to do, but definitely an important and necessary one.
It's a fascinating sector of transportation. Magda, would you be able to assess how high the entry barrier is in this specialization, transporting military goods and dual-use products?
I think the trust level is very high. Everything relies on trust and reputation. There's no room for cold sales here. A client from this industry will not choose the cheapest carrier, but will choose a carrier who is reliable and has well-secured safety procedures.
So, for a company that's been on the market for just 2 years, would it be too soon for them to dive into this? Is it difficult to get started with that first transport? I imagine references must play a big role in this.
Exactly. That means I would suggest starting by cooperating with companies that are already in this industry on a subcontracting basis to gain some experience.
Sure, that makes sense. I wanted to ask you about the market. What are the forecasts? What's the data saying?
Of course, since 2022, as you rightly pointed out, we have seen a significant increase in these types of transports. Interestingly, it is estimated that by the end of 2025, the European Union will allocate a record €381 billion,
co ma stanowić 2,1%,
which will constitute 2.1% of GDP and, for the first time in history, exceed NATO's target.
Czyli możemy spodziewać się, że te
So,
transporty
should we
będą
expect that
całej
1 out
żonie
of every 10 transports will be military related?
We can expect significant growth. Poland is, of course, a leader in this ranking, as it currently allocates 4.7% of its GDP. However, in the long term, continuous growth and increasing investments in this sector are forecasted.
Mam jeszcze jedno pytanie.
One last
dotyczące
question
samych
regarding the
pojazdów.
vehicles.
Które pojazdy
Which
najczęściej
vehicles are
są
most commonly used for transporting military goods?
It's hard to say because it all depends on the size of the goods. As I mentioned, it could be a small package, a small box with a very expensive system, or it could be an oversized item like a helicopter blade. So everything from vans to tarpaulins to oversized items like platforms. Everything is in use.
To jeszcze na zakończenie chciałbym, żebyś
Lastly,
powiedział,
could you share your thoughts on the future of military transport in Europe?
jak w ogóle będzie
Do you see
wyglądało
any
przyszłość
trends emerging, or
transportu
perhaps a
military
specific
sprzętu?
product
Jakie
category
widzisz
that's
jakieś,
becoming more dominant?
tendencje, czy może jakiś konkretny, jakaś kategoria produktów tutaj wiedzie prym?
I think I can point to three leading trends. First, digitization and automation of goods verification, because even today some companies use AI tools to classify these goods or even assess risk. The second trend will definitely be greater transparency in the supply chain, which is regulated by the European Union. For example, regulations regarding conflict materials, which require reporting the origin of raw materials for a given production, or even monitoring and reporting greenhouse gas emissions in supply chains. And the last, I think, will be the increasing involvement of private carriers and operators in the military sector. Because while the military itself delivers various products, it is increasingly outsourcing to external companies.
Czyli tutaj możemy
So
spokojnie
we can rest
powiedzieć,
assured
że
about the
ten
market.
rynek
It
na
will
pewno
certainly
będzie
continue to
bardziej się
grow.
nasycał. No, oby te
Let's hope the
zakończone
armed
konflikty
conflicts
uprawne,
end
ale
soon,
na
but
pewno
they've
one
definitely
pozwolą
played a role in encouraging Europe to
sprawić, że
develop its military
Europa,
potential.
no, dokonała pewnego zwrotu i rozwijała swój potencjał militarny. Magda, bardzo dziękuję za
Magda,
tę
thank you so much
rozmowę.
for this
Dziękuję
conversation,
też
and thank
Państwu,
you everyone for
że
following our
postanowili śledzić
podcast.
nasz
Once
podcast.
again, our
Ja
guest was
przypomnę, że
Magda,
naszym
Business
gościem była
Development
Magdalena
Manager
Zapała,
specializing in military logistics.
menedżer o
Thanks, Magda.
specjalizacji Militaria. Dzięki, Magda.
Thank you, Conrad. Thank you,
A my widzimy
everyone.
się w kolejnym
And we'll see you in the next
podcaście.
podcast.
Pamiętajcie, możecie zawsze
Don't forget, you can
posłuchać,
always listen to other
odcinków,
episodes
które
on
znajdziecie
Spotify
na
and
Spotify,
YouTube, and
YouTube,
soon
a
expect
YouTube
some
jest
brand new
zupełnie
ones. See
zupełnie
you.
nowych. Do zobaczenia.